Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
Lee Boyce, you've been a strength and conditioning coach for, I want to say, as long as I have, or at least as close to. So how many years are you in the business now?
Well, we're going into 24 now, so this is my 17th year just about to start now.
Wow. Yeah, so you're
Been
not as old as me. So it's Derek, what are you now? I'm like 25 now. What are you?
25 years? Jeez, I started in like coaching track in like 88. So I don't know, do the math. Like it's, yeah.
2018, 30. You're like 30, what is that, 36 years?
Yeah, something
Is
like
that right?
that. Don't remind me.
You're that old? But so listen, Lee, the reason why I wanted to bring you on was I feel like you're someone I've been getting to know throughout the years. First off, I've been reading about your stuff on T Nation. It seems like decades ago. And when you start reading, I've always become like fan of certain coaches. Like you'll read about a coach and you'll say, oh wow, this guy's really intelligent, or this woman's really intelligent, or I like their approach. And every time you see their name, you always pay them some respect, but you also dive in and you read about it. So I think over the last couple of years, since I've been getting to know you, it's obvious why you've done so well for yourself in this space, right? You meet coaches and you just hit it off, and the next thing you know, you're at every speaking event together, and then the next thing you know, we're on this podcast. So can you just get into your background a little bit, talk about how you started, talk about how your business is pivoting now, because I find that interesting.
Yeah, so back in the days, I remember even getting into personal training in the first place. It started kind of by way of, I was in the 11th grade, and one of my good friends, he had a session with a personal trainer for helping him out with some hockey training. And so he was like, you want to tag along? I was like, sure. Went there, did the session. It was the most amazing thing that I ever experienced. And so the guy just impressed me. His trainer just impressed me, not for any sort of knowledge or anything like that, just his presence and his energy and all that stuff. And I was like, man, this seems like such a cool career path. I kind of put it out in mind after some time, and I wanted to become like a chiro or some other kind of thing like that. Learned about exercise science in school, took that course not once but twice, did well in it not once but twice. I went to two different schools when I was doing that. And then, got into kinesiology in university. I got recruited as a track and field athlete, as a sprinter in university as well. And so while I was doing both of those things, I started making up my mind whether or not I wanted to take things to working with patients and in a kind of like a clinical kind of setting with physio and stuff like that, and doing more school for that too, versus working with, and I'll say the term loosely, but healthier clients who aren't injured in an athletic circumstance where I'm working with coaching clients or personal training clients. And I said, you know what? I think that's more of my thing. And at age 20, I got into that while I was still running track, while I was still in school. I got my first job at a commercial gym, and the rest sort of speaks for itself. And the snowball sort of began. By the time I was 23, I started writing a lot, and just been working for myself since about 2012. So after my 6th or 7th year in the industry, and I've been on my way since.
Hey.
Was there anybody who like influenced you, a coach or somebody like that, who really got you excited about doing what you're doing? And because I think we all have that one person or two people who you might have said, oh wow, that really makes me feel like I can get into this field.
Yeah. I would say that other than that particular personal trainer that I worked with that time when I was a high schooler, I would say that my experience with track was definitely helpful with my second coach, particularly because he was really, really into breaking down the biomechanics of movement, much more than other track coaches that I'd had. And so that really, really struck with me because it was just very academic. It was very intelligent methods that he would use and that he would explain. And he had a great way of breaking things down, complex subjects down. And I took a page out of his book. When I became a trainer myself, that was definitely an influence. And I peeled a whole bunch of track exercises into my personal training sessions as well, which was probably looking back, not the smartest thing at the time, but it was what I knew. And then I think that one thing that was really important to me was I hired a coach of my own when I was going for my own goals as a trainer at age 20. This was my first year. And he was trying to help me put on strength and size, and his coaching particularly. I remember it like it was yesterday in terms of how impactful it was, learning things from the perspective of being a client, but also just how well he was at coaching, how well he was at communicating, how well he was at doing all those types of things, the soft skills of personal training, really. And that resonated with me a lot. And I still model my approach after his to a certain degree, even to this day.
What type of I don't want to say what type of coach. I want to say more of what type of trainer do you feel like you have become throughout the years? Like you have this running background, but I also see you, doing things that I love to do, like picking up heavy stuff and sticking to the basics when it comes to your lifts. So when you're designing programs, obviously they're going to change per person, but what would you feel is more of your lane, or do you just kind of utilize many different tools out of the toolbox?
I like the idea of saying that my template is that I don't have one, and that my brand is that I don't have one, and that I'm sort of a generalist trainer. I'm a general pop guy. So it's anyone and everyone in terms of that side of things. When it comes to the actual methods that I like to use, I've taken a little bit from everybody that I've learned from, and everything that I've studied and everything that I've read and every, influence that I've had. And I feel like that's sort of the best way for me to go about doing what it is that I do. As far as my coaching style, I like to follow the kind of the mantra that learn to move well, then get stronger while moving well. That's basically it. And if I can sort of stay under that umbrella with people, then it makes it a lot more universal, a lot easier, and a kind of a do no wrong approach. And as long as people can follow those tenets, they're going to see good things happen.
Love it, Dave.
And like with the clients you're working with, is there like sort of a variety in terms of their activities, their goals, but also their ages? Because like I'm, again, I'm in my mid 50s and I've had to modify things for myself. And I was talking to somebody the other day and just saying like, okay, I've shifted it away from like heavy lifting, obviously, but I found other things that I like and that I think are doing a good job for me.
Yeah. So my clientele as a whole, I would say, especially based on the second place in particular that I worked when I was working for a company still. I worked for a medical clinic that was a little bit more of an older demographic in kind of like the heart of downtown Toronto. And that's like the financial hub. So it was a lot of kind of like pinstriped white collar executives who were 40 plus. And that made up 100% of my clientele at the time. And now there's still a lot of that comes through to see me. So I do sort of cater toward at least people who are at the minimum my age, I would say. I do have people who are younger and so on. I have had my pepperings of young athletes and other stuff like that. But the heart, that 35 to 55 type of crowd, and some older, some younger, the main component of my clientele base. And it is a lot more of the what can we do outside of lifting heavy? Well, lifting heavy is one piece of the pie. Strength is one element of fitness, but what is fitness as a whole and how can we achieve that? So I look at fitness in the terms of health and skill related fitness, which are 11 components deep, not just one. Strength is one, and we can get there with strength training, but what other things are we missing out on? What trade-offs are we hitting by just only doing strength training? And that's what I like to explore with clients. And it usually gives them a little bit more of a rounded approach, and it gives them more respect for things just lifting heavy weights.
Do you find because 17 years, right? You said you've been coaching for roughly.
Yeah.
Have you feel like the challenges stay the same when it comes to what you're dealing with clients, or do you feel like because obviously you evolved as a coach throughout the last decade plus, do you feel like those challenges that you had maybe 17 years ago no longer exist, or do you find as a coach that you're always being faced with the same challenges when it comes to dealing with clients?
It's a little bit of both. There's a lot more public knowledge about fitness and what fitness sort of entails and how to train as a basic level today than there was 15 years ago, ever. So a bit more knowledge and a little bit more experience oftentimes. Maybe they said they've done CrossFit now, or maybe they've had a personal trainer in the past, or whatever. And, it's less likely as well that a much older client is going to train with a 21-year-old version of me versus a 36-year-old version of me as well, right? So it's a little bit more common ground when that age gap is a little bit more shrunken oftentimes. So with that being said, people who are more experienced in their lives with more time spent alive, they're going to have probably more experiences in the fitness space than somebody who was a lot younger would, right? Where they're been one-dimensional. I just want to get big, I want to get huge, or I want to lift as heavy as possible, or I want to do this competition, or something along those lines. And so from that perspective, it presents a little bit more unique challenges as far as, I'd say two things. A, managing or working around, like, I have this area of chronic pain, I've been diagnosed with this, I have these kinds of issues that I have to deal with. How can we still make progress and make gains surrounding those issues? And also maybe my schedule is a lot more full of responsibilities than it once was. So that's one thing. And I would say that the other thing would be the challenge that I'm presented with these days has more to do with those soft skills I was talking about. Just making sure that you're a good communicator, which I think is more than half the battle as a personal trainer. If you're able to get your points across, get the learning experience to be worthwhile for the client, and provide that kind of value in the time that you're not spending actually lifting weights, then you've accomplished a whole lot by doing that. So there's a lot of credence that I believe that I have in that.
Lee, you mentioned this idea of like you have to be a great communicator. How, and I go through this a lot myself, is how important is writing for you? Because obviously, Don had mentioned you did some writing, and now I think everything is kind of shifted towards video and obviously podcasts. But do you think it's still important to write and get your thoughts on paper or type them out?
Yeah, I have a blog that I write on as frequently as I can. It used to be much more constant and consistent, but now it's a little less, just because of I'm spread much more thin than I used to be. With that being said, I do think that like the contents of that blog particularly are not things about 6 ways to improve your bench press or 4 different ways to increase your squat performance. They're things that I see in the industry from a sociocultural perspective. They challenge the art of writing for me, number one. So I think that's a great practice for me to continue doing. So I'll never stop doing it. But also, it's a great way for me to just verbalize, or at least articulate my thoughts in a cogent manner. And if that's another channel or medium that I can use to get more people to understand where I'm coming from, or get more people to hear my thoughts on something, or to simplify a topic for them, then great. Then there's the articles and all that stuff that I write that are actually about direct training content. And I think there's a lot of value in that too. There has been countless number of people over the course of my writing career, I guess, where they did contact me or find me through some kind of written word that I've put out there. So there's even benefit from the business perspective in that regard. And I always, when I at the writers for, T Nation, for example, or the writers for place like that, as this was these had a certain level of my respect, and figure carving pathway, and figures that were really being pioneers in a way, or spreading a good set of information. And so I wanted to be one of those people as well, and I aspired to be like them. And for that reason, I just hold writing in a very high regard, even if it's be viewed as antiquated or anything like that. I don't really care. I'm never going to stop doing it. So it's something that I hold pretty close.
Doing this now for 17 years, right? I mean, I find that I'm still as much of a sponge now, maybe even more of a sponge now than I even was when I was a lot younger. And that's because I feel like now we know where a lot of the sources are, right? Like I feel like we have access to so many more sources where we don't have to be at these events publicly, right? Like 20 years ago, we couldn't turn on our social media and start learning from great coaches, or do Zoom calls with them, or do webinars, etc. What do you find? How do you stay up to speed? Do you find it's from speaking at a lot of these engagements, or do you or are there just a select group of coaches that you've always liked to pay attention to, or do you have a mentor? Like, how do you keep up?
It's a combination of kind of everything you just said there. It's definitely being around a lot of other good minds when it comes to conferences and different events, to speak at a fair amount of them. And so I was able to, and have been able to, repeatedly connect with a lot of people who I respect, whose work I follow along with, and whose work I very largely agree with across the board. And so it brings an ideas table. It reinforces current ideas or past ideas, and it brings some stuff out of the woodwork for me as well. So I think that the events and the speaking engagements and all that stuff are a big facilitator toward, keeping my information up. And at the end of the day, in one regard, it's sort of like you get to go to a free weekend of information, right? It's free conferences over and over again that you're doing multiple times per year, where you're hearing 15 different lectures or whatnot of different people on certain subjects, and these are industry leaders. So I can't complain about that. So that's a huge one as well. And as far as like people on social media and people I follow, including the people who are usually at these events speaking, it's I'll have like a good, let's say 36 or so core group of like go-tos, as far as like, this is information, this exercise that I'm seeing right here, I'm going to go and apply that tomorrow at the gym with my next clients, and so on, that kind of stuff. So social media definitely has its advantages that outweigh its disadvantages, I would say. So I take that pretty seriously as well. Follow crazily high amounts of people. I don't have in the thousands of people that I follow or anything like that, so that I can still stay with just not get too much of a good thing, if that makes sense. The analysis paralysis, or too much of a good thing, or overexposure, or anything like that. So I think that it's nice to keep it sort of close knit sometimes.
Derek, I still think it's amazing how you can get together with the same person over and over and over, and you're still always picking up on things, right, Lee? And I know this is part of the magic of speaking at a lot of these events, and going and listening to people lecturing. Sometimes I find that even a bit less stimulating than just spending some alone time with an additional speaker, or going for a workout with them, or actually going and having dinner with them. Because a lot of times the speakers are going up there and they're trying to generalize the topic. A lot of times they are repeating things that you may have heard, or they've definitely presented a dozen times. But like the other day, Derek was over here. Like, Derek and I do a weekly podcast, and Derek starts talking to me. I know for you personally, you're a back squat person. I enjoy back squats. It's something that I've always been dialed into doing, yet it's a movement that's been bastardized by so many strength and conditioning coaches. Now, we all know that there's not a one size fits all, and we could put that aside because everyone's heard that before. But Derek started talking about activity through the Achilles tendon that he's finding that a lot of people, or a lot of athletes, aren't getting by not loading on their back, or a trap bar, and how that's removing from specific improving specific attributes from the athlete, that maybe they're getting so knee dominant now, and why are we getting a lot of pulled hamstrings in the NFL? And that's Derek's specialty. So to be able to sit with my podcast partner and listen to him, and I've listened to him a million times, you're always picking things up, I find, from the people that you're even really close to.
Yeah, that's very true. And I like that as well. It's funny because I was just thinking about, as you were saying that, the different opportunities I had in the last, I'd say 2 or so years, I guess post-pandemic, to get one-on-one or in small group settings with coaches that I respect and whatnot. Most recently, I can think about Luca, and the fact that we went to do a workout together when he was here in Toronto, and then go to breakfast afterwards and grab a bite to eat. And the nuggets of wisdom that I was able to sort of absorb from him over that grand total of maybe 3.5 hours that we spent together it's invaluable, And I could say that about even when you and I were in Edmonton, and we were able to get that workout in as well, and we were able to talk about stuff. Just Andy Morgan, I can go on about all sorts of different people like that, where you have Andrew Coates, where you have different opportunities to sit down, spend some one-on-one time. And you learn something new. And it's gotten to the point for me where what I like to do is kind of, and I know that everybody is good at everything, but I like to sort of put people in their own little templates. They have their thing that they're so good at. For Luca, I say this guy knows the hustle side of personal training. This is what he knows. He's the hustle guy. And so when I have things to think about in terms of learn to build a business, or really how to work a client in that regard, that's who I would try to talk to. And then Don Saladino, he's about celebrity training especially. And so when I have certain things I want to do about that, I got to talk to Don Saladino. Andrew Coates, he's about connections. He's about making sure that you've got connections and so on. So I could talk to somebody about that, introductions and networking and all that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. And I find that the more you talk to somebody, the more you learn about sort of what they're best at, and how you guys can help each other in what area. But number two, it's just you learn new things under those subheadings every single time that you talk to somebody. And I think that's great. And it's very, very, it's priceless, really.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what you guys are saying, like the course that I taught last Sunday, Don, it It was good because the people who were there were all intelligent, everybody who attended. So it was like we were just going back and forth, and I like that type of dynamic rather than me just speaking to an audience that can't ask questions or just sits there, right? So I think, like you guys said, getting into more of a collaborative learning environment is really useful. The question I had for Lee was the one thing I'm not struggling with, but I have to work hard at is there's always new technology coming out, and sometimes you know that it's frivolous, but other times you're trying to assess, like, is that going to be useful for what I do, or should I learn more about that? Do you find that you're in that space as well, where you're trying to go like, okay, I want to be current, I want to be, technologically advanced with what I do, but how do you filter out the crap from what is actually useful?
Yeah, well, I'm in some ways I'm not the greatest person to ask because of how behind I am with some of those types of things. I keep it old school, and I'm very, very well aware of that. So I'm not like on the latest gadgets that are out there for from a personal training perspective, but also from like a business development perspective. I'm just not that guy, haven't ever been. With that being said, I do think that there is some credence in the idea that, the tried, tested, and true old school methods, there's a reason why they're sticking around and they're still there and they still are useful because, they're tried, tested, and true for a reason. And so I try to apply that to both sides of my work. Number one, the business side of my work in terms of, what tends to work is what tends to work, and don't really mess around with too many of those methods. But on this other side, like in terms of personal training, the act of personal training, are we starting to use more AI? Are we starting to use more different tools and gadgets? Are we starting to use more different things that are going to enhance a personal training experience for a client? Or are we gonna, it's kind of like lifts, right? Like, or are we gonna stick with your basic, your squat pattern, your hinge pattern, your push and pull pattern, vertical, horizontal, and know that these things, no matter what phase of training you're in, are going to yield the results that you're kind of looking for, what the client is looking for. And all you have to do is now make micro adjustments to things like volume, things like intensity, things like how you're going to group prepare your sets, rest interval, and so on. And so I try to apply the same thing to on the gym floor and off of the gym floor in terms of the business side of things. So I mean, I know it was a little bit of a roundabout answer. It doesn't really exactly tell you whether or not I'm all really up to date with all that stuff. But at the same time, as bad as a person as I am to ask, I do think that there is something to be said for keeping it old school sometimes.
I was talking to Don about this, and there's people that I'll meet who can't do an exercise without attaching something to themselves, whether it's like velocity based lifting or, those types of things where it's like, come on, just work out. Like, don't worry about that stuff.
I've had a couple of clients where, and this gets back to the communication aspect of it as well, actually. Like I've had a couple of clients where they are very caught up with those smaller facets, the minutia behind training. What is the amount of ground contact time I should have on a depth jump into a box jump? I heard that anything over 0.2 seconds of ground contact time means that I have an inferior amount of plyometric capability or fast twitch or high threshold motor unit capability. And it's like, dude, just jump off just do the thing. It's not going to be any more useful to you to know this data rather than just practice the thing and get better at it.
Right. And it's probably one of the big it's probably the area of our industry that I'm really, I'm a bit bummed out about, right? It's like suddenly people start taking something that's good and they start shining a really, they start taking light off of it, right? Like, there's this whole, and you know about it. Everyone's cold plunging now, and everyone's jumping in saunas now. Like this is cold therapy, guys. As we all know, anyone listening, like it's been around for centuries. Like this is not some new science, but out of nowhere, everyone's jumping into cold plunges, and now 5 minutes later, well, you shouldn't do it after a workout. Well, you don't want to cut down on inflammation completely. I'm like, dude, shut up. Just if you have an opportunity to jump in a tank for a minute and you're gonna feel better. You know what? So am I going to tell someone, well, I can either do it after the workout for a minute and I'm going to feel great, or I'm not going to do it at all? 1 minute in a cold plunge is suddenly it's gonna stint your gains. Like you're suddenly not gonna, you're not going to develop, you're not going to evolve. Well, that's funny. Like hasn't happened to me. And I've been doing it. I've owned cryotherapy chambers. I've been doing cold therapy for 25 years. Like I don't, maybe longer. So that's the part of the industry that's bumming me out. What is something that sticks out in your head since you've started that you're saying to yourself, oh man, I wish, I wish people would relax, or I wish it didn't go in this direction. And then I want to hear from the other end. What are things that have evolved for the better?
Well, I think that as a whole, and this is something that actually we were together in Edmonton when I was giving this talk. It was about, just the identity crisis that sometimes I think that the personal training industry can suffer from. At the end of the day, it's not too difficult to learn enough ample information to get your body to a different level of fitness and health. If you follow certain simple instructions and guidelines, you're probably going to do more good than you are bad for yourself, right? You learn technique, you learn how to eat decently, you learn how to be consistent, and you keep on doing the same things over and over again by repetition, practice through repetition, good things are going to happen. So I almost feel like because of the way that our industry might be viewed sometimes by people who aren't in it, whether it could be considered less academic or it could be considered less serious or whatever it is, I feel like the general nature of our industry might be to overcompensate by being over scienced about things. Now, there's a really good place that belongs for research and for all kinds of things like that, and studies and journals and all that stuff. And we need that stuff to keep this industry moving forward in the right ways. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that every Jack and Jill personal trainer out there who's working with simple clientele who don't need too advanced information or who would benefit the most from the least amount of that information, that these people are going to require that sort of thing. And that's the issue with the identity crisis. I think we try to make ourselves sound a little bit more scientific and more smart and all that stuff than we really need to be. And sometimes less is more. So that would definitely be my feedback on what I've seen in the industry in the past, decade and change, at least, maybe even the entire time over the years, to try to claim a little bit more relevancy or try to maintain a little bit more of an air of, I don't know, not inferiority. I'll say that. So that would definitely be that side of things. And, I struggle to even articulate that properly, but I hope that makes sense. I do think that it exists, especially around, a city like mine. It definitely exists. And there's a trainer on every street corner in the city, like in my city. So there's a whole lot of people who think that giving a cue, like setting your shoulders back and pulling the weight toward you with good form, is not enough to teach for a seated row. And you have to say 10 million more things to get a client to do it well, and find 10 million more things that are wrong. And if somebody isn't sitting like this, but they're sitting like that, then that's a problem. And on and on and on it can go. And sometimes we don't need to split so many hairs. And there's a beauty in that simplicity if we actually take it seriously. And again, if we focus more on soft skills and other skills that aren't just technicalities of personal training and biomechanics and all that stuff, then we'd probably be a lot better off as a career personal trainer. That's for sure.
100%. I mean, Derek, the other day, a good buddy of mine came to me, and his diet is beautiful. And he said, what do I need to do with my diet? And I've got a little bit of experience getting people ready for contest prep or getting ready for timing wise from a nutritional standpoint. And I said, nothing. I said, your diet's amazing. And he's like, well, what's wrong? And I'm not going to repeat the language that I use, but I was like, your training is just, it's become soft. Like, I saw you working out lower body. You're checking your emails. Your intensity is probably a 4 out of 10. And I was like, these are areas that people don't want to talk about anymore. They want to talk about the perfect exercise, the perfect way to measure macros, metabolic flexibility, using all these devices. At the end of the day, it's okay if you built up that experience and you have that training age underneath your belt, getting underneath the bar and being a little nervous for a set. I think it's a healthy thing, Lee. And I don't know where your opinion is on that. I would assume it's where mine is.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. Sometimes it's too much of a good thing can be more harmful than good. And I think that once you start splitting too many hairs, focusing on stuff like what your exact VO2 max is, or what timing this is, and what is the most perfect rep, or the most perfect set, or the most perfect exercise. And, before we even go any further, we have to consider the fact that you can't blanket one thing and say that this is the best or the most stimulating exercise for a person, because how many factors are at play there? If we think about, okay, the pec fly, the seated the 45-degree incline dumbbell pec fly is going to be the best way to stimulate your chest through its range of motion. Okay, well, what's the training age of the individual who you trialed this out on? Number two, what is the actual age? What's their flexibility levels, and what is their actual like tendon attachment point look like? Where is it located on the humerus? What are the leverages and the anthropometry of the individual? Is it somebody with very long arms for a massive moment arm when they're doing that fly, or someone with very short arms where they're barely going to feel anything when they're in a full arm extension like that? There's a whole lot of questions that you can ask that could influence whether or not a lift or a movement or a training program or a system is going to be the most effective for them or not. And it's not that the exercises should be contraindicated, but it's the people that should be contraindicated. We keep that in mind, then we realize that there's no bad exercise, that every program has its own good that it can provide. And a wicked program that you see in a book or in a magazine or in an article or something like that might not be the best fit for you because of what your starting point is, whether you're a beginner, whether you're advanced. It's all fantastic information, but does it fit you as an individual? And that's where I think a lot of people sort of get lost in the woods there.
Love it.
It was interesting. Like I was telling Don that one of the missing pieces in my own training was I discovered because we acquired a dog. So guess what? I'm the one who has to clean up after the dog, feed it, and walk it. So I'm walking the dog for 7 days a week. I'll probably do at least 1 to 1.5 hours and I'll try to walk, fast. So it's like a 110 to 120 beats per minute. But that was the piece that was missing, that low intensity component. And so by accident, I figured out that, wow, now I sleep better. My body composition's better. I'm not as stiff. I just feel better going into other workouts. So it's sometimes it's interesting finding this real boring, element that I was missing because I was trying to push it in other areas. So do you ever find stuff like that where it's just this really basic stuff that maybe somebody's missing?
Yeah, 100%. As you were saying, that stuff about low intensity cardio work, walking, I could relate my own personal workouts as of today, like as of the last literal 2 weeks. I've been training in a certain way. I was even pushing a heavy squat just the other day. But I said, you know what I haven't done in a while, thinking about fitness? I haven't done a lot of muscular endurance training. Like I'd hit 8 reps. My squats and deadlifts, I'd be doing triples and stuff like that. And then I'd be doing body weight workouts and whatnot. But when's the last time that I did everything for muscular endurance? Multiple rep sets. We're talking about 10, 15, 20 repetitions and so on. Change my rest intervals up as well. And immediately, since I've started doing that for the last 2 weeks now, number one, I've noticed that my sleeps are better. Number two, I've noticed that my body is starting to recomp just a little bit from that change in conglomerates with a good diet and so on. And number three, I'm noticing that, joint pain, chronic pain, discomfort, all that stuff, my body is saying thanks for not having as much loading on it all the time. So I'm going to stick with it for a while, feeling great, feeling really good, able to train more frequently. Energy levels are on point. CNS isn't getting destroyed by it every single time as well. It's feeling fantastic. So again, like you're saying, it's the little things, it's the smallest tweaks that can make all of the difference. You get a client who comes in and says, I'm hitting a plateau with all these gains and whatnot. I want to get this, I want to get that, or I'm dealing with pain here, or whatever the case may be. Say, okay, let's take a look at your lifts. You take a look at their squat, their deadlift, or whatever, it looks fantastic. Take a look at their pull-up, looks fantastic. Okay, let's change that pull-up into a flexed arm hang. Just hold, that's all. Let's change those squats into a 3-second eccentric, take away 25% of the loading that you're lifting all the time, and freeze at the bottom for a good 2-second count. How does that feel? World of difference for them. All of a sudden, they bust through those plateaus. There'll be things as simple as that can make all of the difference in the world, all the change in the world for a person. And it can be a massive, massive catalyst to gains if we just think simple. Brett Bartholomew said something that always stuck with me, and he said that when he was making or looking at programs and reviewing clients' old programs, he doesn't look at what he can add to it. He looks at what he can take away from it to make it more effective. And so I always like that idea of using like a law of subtraction to think about how much more can we remove, simplify this to make it more effective for a person. So I try to follow that too.
It's amazing how just the simplest changes, right? Adding in a pause, changing up an eccentric or even a concentric, or even, increasing reps. I mean, you could keep the same program and do something like that. It changes the entire dynamic of it. It's amazing how you could just start feeling better from such an easy, for such an easy adjustment. That took you time though to realize, didn't it? Because it's not until, I think there's certain things. I have a lot of friends who are young coaches, and they're just things you're going to learn through trial and error, not through reading books. There's things you're going to learn through how your body feels, hitting plateaus, and how you get yourself out of that. Do you feel like age was a factor there? Do you feel like that? Because how old are you now?
I'm 36. I'll be 37 next month. And like, it's
Yeah.
a huge point is that I always say that like, you gotta learn your body. You gotta know your body. And I always attribute it to like a car type of thing. Like when you drive a brand new car, I have a great time driving that brand new car off the lot and whatnot. But there's certain things that, at least in personal experience, that you can't do with it just yet. After you've been driving that thing every day for like, a couple of good months, you can parallel park it with your eyes closed. You don't have to look over your shoulder to do this kind of maneuver or that kind of maneuver. You know exactly how much gas you've got to hit in order to get around that other vehicle if you want to pass it, et cetera, et cetera. Like you just learn your car. You know how to manage through tight corners without chipping it and whatnot. And the same thing goes, and that just comes with experience driving the vehicle, right? And then you know your vehicle so well that you can do things that people in the passenger seat are like, how do you even just do that? So the same thing goes for the body in terms of like, learning the skill of training intuitively and understanding A, what works for your body, and B, what doesn't. It comes with only one thing, and that is time spent under the iron in the trenches, doing the thing of working out and learning those movements that are going to be the friendly ones to your body and the ones that aren't. If you've had injuries or some kind of setbacks, that can be a great learning experience for that stuff as well. And it can go a long way in teaching you what kinds of things are going to be friendly to your body and what kind of things aren't. So that's a little bit of a lemonade way of looking at injuries or setbacks, for sure, as a glass half full way of taking advantage of those drawbacks that you've had or some sort of stagnations in your training, because it can teach you a lot. It can teach you a lot. And I'll tell you, like, I don't train myself the way that I did when I was 22. I don't train clients the way that I did when I was 22. And I wouldn't train a client who is 40 years old the same way now than I would have when I was 22 and I had a 40-year-old client. I wouldn't train them the same way. A lot of things, you start talking about body types again as well. You throw that factor into the mix as well, and you start seeing, okay, I've got a taller client, I got a longer legged client, I've got a client with a short torso, I've got a client with this, that, or the third, small hands. There are all kinds of factors there that can influence, okay, well, how much rest, how much weight am I making them use? What versions of this deadlift am I making them do? What is going to be the tempo that I'm going to make them lift at? How many sets of this, and so on and so forth. It makes a huge difference. What happens if the lifter is 275 pounds versus and in shape versus a lifter who is 160 pounds and in shape? What is that going to mean for this conditioning workout? What do we have to change here, right? And these are the things that, again, like, you can't expect to know right out of the gate, but we're in one of those unique industries where we get better at doing this job through practicing doing this job more than anything else can teach us, in my opinion. So I tell a lot of young trainers and the students that I teach at the college and so on, that the most invaluable thing for you as a young trainer, lifter, whatever you want to call it, is hire a coach, hire a good one. Learn from that through the experience of being the client. And it could be a big game changer for you in the trajectory of your career.
That's something, Derek, that I've been doing for 25 years, is that whether I hired a coach in the past or I would work with a coach that maybe had something to offer that I wanted to learn from. And I always recommend a coach paying another coach, like said, or at least if you have some type of barter to work out something that they need specific, do it. Hands down, do it. Because even to this day, my eyes are being open to different approaches, different ways about going, different ways that they would go about things. And then you're always kind of taking and implementing a little bit of these tricks, Lee. And it could also be something that, maybe I saw you doing 15 years ago, and then suddenly you forget about it. Because think about how many things where you're like, holy shit, I haven't done that in years. Like I got to start re-implementing this, right? I mean, does that happen to you a lot?
It does, 100%. And to the point of hiring coaches, like, yeah, I've done it multiple times over the course of my career. Most recently, I've been working with, I'm not currently, but most recently I had been working with an isometrics only instructor and an isometrics only coach. And, Brad Thorpe is a brilliant, muscle activation techniques guy. And he's brilliant with things like what's the name of the certification there? Resistance training specialist. That's the name. And so just talking about how muscles affect mobility, how muscles create motion and all that stuff, and what are going to be the actual ways to break down a force curve. This is isometric training to the max, is the type of stuff that he does. And the amount of stuff that I've pulled from it personally, and the amount of stuff that I pulled from it to use in my clients, my workouts, my programming for online clients, and all kinds of different methods. It's I teach it in school now too. It's fantastic information. And I attribute so much of my last, let's say, 7 or 8 years worth of knowledge that I put out there to that experience alone, to those experiences of working with that coach for the isometric stuff and being able to collaborate with him, being able to sit down with him, being able to hang out with him. You know, he's involved in the NBA now. He's involved in the Toronto FC. He's got a lot of different sports teams who are utilizing a lot of his methods. You know, we got to go last season out to a Raptors game where he was playing they're playing the Cavaliers, and the Cavs are using that thing on the court as well. And it's like, it's really cool to see. And so, you know, the conversations that we can have as a byproduct of that, it's fantastic. And it really helped me out a lot. And it's, again, something that I highly recommend in terms of working with coaches and how much you can learn from it.
Yeah, I have a question for both of you. And how do things change as we go into December? Is how, you know, you train somebody, winter, inclement weather, stress levels, people wanting to take time off for vacation. How do you organize people's lives around this time of year? And do you change much to make sure that you are still getting, you know, some effective workouts in and some consistency?
Well, Lee's the guest, so let's fire it at him.
Well, funny enough, and this might not be the answer that a lot of people expect me to say, but I just make myself more available than usual, to be honest. I make myself more available than usual rather than say, you know what, holiday season? Yeah, guess what? I'll be off for holiday season as well. I know that things are going to be a little bit fluctuating in terms of people's availability. Some people might have more during certain weeks of it. Some people might have less. Some people might want a little bit more flexibility in the sense of, you know what, I got these holiday events that I have to go to back to back to back, or I have these parties, or I have a lot of business stuff that I've got to do that's going to be crammed into this spot. And then, then I'm going to have a week where it's free, or I'm going to be on vacation from the 24th until the 3rd of January. So I won't be around. Can you ramp this up before? Can you tell me some stuff to do during? And then can I hit you right afterwards as well? All those different scenarios that have come up for me, and I'm sure they've come up for you as well. And so in that vein, I sort of try to make myself a little bit more available, a little bit more flexible, because there will be almost guaranteed a slightly lower client volume when you have the holidays roll around, right? And so managing that by making yourself a little bit more available and say, you know what, most stuff is in time off in the big picture. So why not just make myself available? And it's going to, A, it's going to be more possible business, but B, it's just going to accommodate clients a little bit better, show that you're there for them, number two. And I mean, I happen to love what I do, so it's not a problem for me to do so. And that's the way that I try to sort of get ahead of things and be around as a voice of reason for people if they tend to want to maybe overindulge or go a little bit too hard when it comes to the holidays or fall off the wagon. Maybe even they go on that vacation and then the new year hits and they were ready to go at first, but then once that all came through and transpired, all of a sudden that new year start gets pushed back to the second week, third week of January. I hit a whirlwind of work and a storm of work when I came back from holidays. Let's start in February. Like those kinds of things start to creep into the picture. So usually absence can make that sort of thing more of a reality for people than not being absent and staying consistent. So I try to make myself say, you know what, guess what? This is all I'm working right through. Don't worry. Yeah, okay, you got Christmas Day, you got Boxing Day, but otherwise I'll be there. Between New Year's and Christmas and all that, I'm there. Don't worry about it. We can still get some sessions in. Let me know what you got. So that's the kind of approach that I like to take to try to get ahead of things and, for lack of a better term, some damage control where needed. And it tends to work out pretty well.
You know, it's funny. I was watching. Did you guys watch that Conor McGregor documentary yet called McGregor Forever? I don't know if you
haven't seen it yet.
You know, it was interesting. I mean, the last couple of documentaries I watched between him and Beckham, it's amazing to me where you see these world-class athletes, and what you don't realize, because you know, I was not a huge McGregor fan and I wasn't a huge Beckham fan. I just wasn't around those sports. But you don't realize the amount of volatility that was in their life when it came to their success and failures. Like they would win and they would lose massively. They'd win, they'd break, you know, a foot. You know, they'd win, They would get caught cheating, whatever it was. It was always these massive highs and these massive lows that would crush normal people. And McGregor said something. I wrapped up the documentary last night. He said something, and I really respected it. He ended up losing a match years ago, and they were like, "Well, what do you think changed in your preparation for this?" And he's like, I started waking up in the morning, and rather than being up at this time, maybe I'd hit the snooze. It was a half hour later, and I'd have to train at 11, and maybe it became 1. I would still get the stuff in. Most people would say, what's the big deal? You're still doing it, right? But he's like, it was the discipline. It was the fact that I was giving in. It was that mental discipline of like, I said I was going to do something, and then suddenly the time of the day changes, and then your mentality changes. He thought he just got kind of soft, and he got loose. And it was something that I was talking about a few minutes ago with my buddy John Albuquerque here. He was 525 pounds about 18 months ago, and he's about to crack that 400-pound mark. And I'm super proud of him, but it's that discipline. Again, unable to walk 400 to 600 steps a day. And I'm looking on his calendar here, and he has 6,000 on day 1, over 6,000 day 2, 6,000 day 3. He had over $6,000 each day for 5 days. And then what happened? He dropped to the 4,000 mark, and he dropped to the 4,000 mark. And I'm like, oh my God, you were so close to hitting that PR. Why did you back off? And he went into the mental approach on all this. And it really is all of what we're doing here. For me, it was never about this. It was always about this, right? It was always about how can we get you to January 1, not having to recreate all these resolutions or set all these resolutions, but waking up saying, wow, this is the best I felt on a January 1st in however many years. And that's what I really respected what McGregor said. And I don't think people realize sometimes that doing things like continually hitting the snooze button or doing the things like not following through with a plan, you could develop bad habits. All I'm really looking for out of someone is consistency. Be consistent, dog it. I don't care. Show up and downshift and go in third gear, but get it in if it's a bad day, but be consistent. So I loved your answer, what you gave. Mine's, I think, in a way, very, very similar, but in a way, we're also talking about this.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, the habit side of things and building habits and making sure that things are, it's not something that's worth compromise. You can't compromise. These are the non-negotiable aspects. And, if you train at 7 o'clock, then that's when you train every single time. Again, Andrew Coates says a lot of this sort of thing as well, where it's like there are a lot of things and moving parts in somebody's life, but don't let training be one of them. And he's a real disciple of that craft himself when he says that. And I agree. I'm somebody who likes to train usually in the late mornings. And that's the time that I tend to get it in. I write out whatever it is that I have to do. I try to get it in as consistently as possible. And I do that. I've been doing that for years. So it's a really good habit to get into, and it really facilitates a lot more discipline and a lot more gains and a lot more mental fortitude and a lot of other things too that can come along with it.
Well, Derek, anything else to close out with?
Did you watch this Stallone bio? Yeah. What'd you think of that?
I haven't.
Oh man, I thought it was a little redundant, right? It was just kind of, you just felt like it was the same story. I think these other 2 documentaries I saw was interesting because everything was changing so much. I know Sly uses some pretty intense words, which I question are even in the dictionary. But no, listen, he's a rip, and I think he's a genius for the brand. And he's one of the only. What other actors do created 3 different, what's the word I'm looking for? Between Rocky, Rambo, and the Expendables, 3 different. No, help me out here. I'm drawing a blank. Long day.
Yeah, they're like trilogies or
yeah, 3 different. Rob's not helping me out here. He's got to start. Stallone created 3 different. He created 3 different. He created Rocky, Rambo, and franchises.
Yeah, franchises.
Oh
there
my
you go.
God! Thank you. Thank you.
Younger guy had to come up with it.
Oh my God, I'm fried. But Lee, do me a favor. Can you let everyone know where they can find you? You got some programs launching right now. Talk about that for a second.
So email list is coming for sure. And right now I got social, which is Coach Lee Boyce across the board. You got Twitter, I got Facebook, I got Instagram. So you can find me on those, especially Instagram. I'm posting at least once every single day. It's been that way for 5 years now, 6 years now, every day without fail. Always good fitness content on those. And also leeboyce.com. That's my website. find archives of all of the articles, the 1,000+ articles that I've written over the years for different publications that can help with training. And if you want to read more editorial content on that blog right on the website, you'll see a lot of stuff about fitness from a social cultural perspective and whatnot, and just some good thought-provoking counterintuitive takes that are pretty unfiltered, and they're pretty good reads. So that's where you can find me. And last but not least, Strength Training for All Body Types, the book.
Yep.
Is a book that I wrote with Melody Schoenfeld, and that is now available everywhere. You can catch it on humankinetics.com, but more commonly, you catch it on Amazon, and that's going to be for sale there. There's some promotions coming up for the holidays for it as well. It's doing pretty well, so it's something that everybody should read. It's got a lot of good technical information with a real mainstream reach at the same time. So it's really beneficial to literally everybody: trainer, client, beginner, intermediate, advanced. So can't go wrong.
Well, my man, you are a real coach. You know, it's very few. You know, we could say that about very few out there. And like you said earlier, the Lucas, and you know, there is a list of obviously Boyle, the godfather of strength and conditioning, and his team he's put together. Charlie Weingroff, you know, Jordan Shallow. There's a group of us out there that I feel like Derek Hansen, real coaches. Lee Boyce, you've been a real coach for almost 2 decades already. So congrats on everything, your success. We're in your corner if you need anything, and we'll let you know when this goes live.
Appreciate it.
All right, brother.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks,
man.
Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. All right.